Hey Josh, let's look today at a keyword in a book of the Bible that I have been reading recently. The book is called Ecclesiastes. It's one of the three books in the Bible that are typically classified as wisdom literature, along with Job and Proverbs. And here in this book that I really like, because it goes hard after the question of meaning of life, after the question of how to live a happy life here under the sun. And so here in this book, the author uses a keyword almost 40 times, a word that is in this translation that we have here, New American Standard Bible, translated as vanity. And if you look at the range of English translations, which is something we are going to do in a moment, we will see that translators choose number of different words to translate the Hebrew term. And that kind of tells us that there is certain uncertainty with what English word expresses properly the Hebrew term. And that sort of is a reason for us to look at Hebrew to see if there is anything we can get from understanding the range of the meanings of the Hebrew term. So let's start by reading the first two verses of this book, because in the second verse we find the key word 5 times in a single verse. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. So right here we have our term five times. Vanity of vanities, that's 2. Vanity of vanities, that's 4. And once more vanity, so that's 5 in a single verse. Let's now compare other translations and how the translators translate this verse. So in ESV, we read vanity of vanities, and so the translation is really the same here. In American Standard Version, we read vanity, so the translation is again the same, which already tells us that actually majority of translations choose this term vanity, which is a little problem because even though I'm not a native English speaker, my understanding is that word vanity is sort of old English word that perhaps a lot of people do not really know exactly what it means. If you look at Jewish Bible, we see a different translation here, pointless, pointless, utterly meaningless, and nothing matters. So that's interesting. The translator here actually chooses 3 distinct ways to translate the Hebrew term in a single verse. So what is translated as vanity of vanities is translated as pointless, pointless ones, and then as utterly meaningless, and then the lone vanity is translated as nothing matters. That's interesting. And NIV, that's going to be the last one we look at, translates it as meaningless, meaningless, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. So right here we see 3 options, pointless, meaningless, and the most frequent vanity. If we looked at other translations, we would see words like empty, enigma, paradox, and so on. So let's now look at the Hebrew term and explore what it can mean, and to see if it can tell us more about the meaning of that term. So if you look at our book at Kohelet here in Hebrew, and the second verse where we find the key term 5 times, in Hebrew reads havel, havalim, amar, Kohelet, havel, havalim, hakol, havel. So here we read our key term 5 times, 3 times in a singular, havel, 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 and twice in plural, havalim, havalim. As you know, this suffix im is what makes the word plural in Hebrew. So let's explore this word in more details. And so first let's look at the range of meanings it has in Hebrew scripture. So we can see that actually perhaps half of the cases, which is 72 in total, so in our Old Testament in Hebrew scripture, the term havel, or plural havalim, occurs 72 times, out of which almost half is translated as vanity of or vanities, which and we are using ESV for our analysis here. Then quite a bit of cases are translated as breath. Then we have an interesting translation, idols, here. And then vanity, worthless, false, nothing, empty, gained, hastile, that's interesting, and vapor. If you look at the usage of this term in the various Old Testament books, we see that out of the 72 usages, Ecclesiastes is responsible for more than a half, or 38. Then Jeremiah and Psalms are using it quite a bit, and then the other books are using it just sparingly. So if you look at the use of this word in the Old Testament, we see that pretty much all the use cases that are translated as vanity are in Ecclesiastes, with two exceptions, one in Isaiah, one in Jeremiah. Then we have number of cases where the word is translated as breath in Job, in Psalms, and in Isaiah. And the translation idols is really quite interesting, where apparently the translators think that the authors of the Bible think about the idols as something that's sort of emptiness, that's vain, and so use that term to describe this physical object. And then the other use cases here, with the use case translated as vapor in Proverbs 21. The getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a fleeting vapor and a snare of death. So then if we look at the definition of the word, we see that the three main meanings are vapor, breath, and vanity. So that tells us that the English translation vanity, which is used most frequently, is perhaps the right one, but on the other hand, who knows what it exactly means. The more descriptive translation, or the translation that is easier to understand what it actually means, such as pointless or meaningless, could be problematic in that they seem to describe something that doesn't have any meaning. Whereas the actual term havel, given its range of meanings, is actually trying to describe something that does exist, such as vapor or breath, that is actually important for certain things, such as vapor and breath, but that humans have difficulty to grasp, difficulty to understand, it's difficult for them to describe. So when we read in our English Bibles the term vanity, which is what you will encounter the most in your English translations, then it's useful to keep in mind that whenever you run into vanity, especially in the book of Ecclesiastes, you should actually imagine the Hebrew word havel with its range of meanings that describes something that is difficult to grasp, it's ungraspable by humans, yet it actually exists, it's real.